What's up, guys? Josh Vogel here with my friend Bryce. Bryce is one of the trainers over at MI40, very knowledgeable guy, competitive bodybuilder, and just overall really great coach. Bryce, give us a little bit of background about where you're from and kind of how you got involved with everything.
Well, I'll give you guys really the short story because my story is not really that impressive nor that interesting to make it long. But I'm not originally from Tampa, I'm from Ohio, but what brought me to Tampa is the idea of the fact that I just was trying to get to a spot where I could be pushed mentally to bring my my effort in the gym physically to a new level. And I advise all of you guys to do that, is to make a decision that kind of gets you uncomfortable, maybe something you're a little bit hesitant about, because oftentimes those decisions will be the best ones for you, and that's what it was for me. I had the amazing opportunity to work around a bunch of really intelligent guys that have mentored me, that have ultimately helped me become a better athlete, but more importantly, helped me with my passion of coaching people. So my passion right now is very simply the fact I really love to watch people move in the gym. I love the way the human body moves, especially when it comes to building muscle. So my whole goal is always to bring in as much information that can benefit making a person as efficient as possible with training with weights, and that's really what it's all about. So I've been competing for 10 years, but in the last 3 years that I've really incorporated almost a mindful approach to my training. It's helped my intensity in the gym, it's really helped my longevity. I don't have injuries and nagging me all the time, and it's helped me in a periodization standpoint to consistently have progress without plateauing. So I'm a firm believer that when you get execution down in the gym, okay, the sky's the limit. There really is no genetic barrier at that point in time.
Okay. And I know Bryce and I were talking, and we decided that we were going to do this video series.
Yeah.
And one of the things we discussed was kind of powerlifting and bodybuilding and how they can kind of intertwine. And I guess I would be considered more of like a performance athlete in the fact that I compete in both, and kind of how each benefits one another.
Sure.
I know, for example, Bryce, you've said it yourself, like when you've watched me train, whenever I train with heavier weights and heavier loads, I tend to look the best and feel the best, versus when I go into more like metabolic stuff, like very high drop sets, very high rep sets, where I don't recover nearly the same and that type of thing. What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, I really think there's a biochemical reason behind that, from when we're like in our pre-adolescent age to like the environment that we're most predisposed to. So if I had to ask questions as a person come in, I'd be like, okay, Josh, what's what you did in your past? And I would guess, seeing you train, you did more explosive things early in your childhood than you did long distance things. It's not like you went out and you were running several miles, right? You're doing things that required tissue to be explosive. So you're probably going to be most comfortable in that environment. Your body's going to be most adapted in that environment. And from the standpoint of training, your volume is going to be able to last the longest in that environment. On the other end of the spectrum, the metabolic environment, so the environment to where you have a lot of time under tension, you're in sets a long time, you're not going to really be able to stay in that period, maybe not quite as long. And within the scheme of just that workout, you may fizzle out very fast because your body just isn't very adapted in there. It doesn't mean that there's not benefit. You just have to know when to incorporate it, and you have to have a very definitive why. And the more advanced that you become in your training, the more tissue that you start to get, bigger in a sense, the even more intelligent you need to be with that approach, because ultimately you may have the right intentions of the style of training that you're trying to do. You may be wanting to do a giant set, but if you haven't taken care of all the other variables around it to make sure that that's efficient, you could actually be adding a stress that's really undue for your body, which is why the world of powerlifting and the world of bodybuilding is so cool, because when you think about bodybuilding, you think about those long sets for the burn, for the pump. When you think about powerlifting, you think about just a 1 rep max. Well, for either goal set, whether you're the powerlifter or you're the bodybuilder, being pretty good at different points in time at each end of the spectrum, if you think of this continuum and then being on different ends, could be beneficial for that sport. And you're kind of getting to experience that, having done both already so young in your career, right?
Yeah.
As you kind of can see how when you got in and did a competition, it kind of benefited coming back around into trying to get ready for a competition of powerlifting, right? Yeah, which is pretty cool, because they are a lot more intertwined than you think. And having one of our coaches at the facility, Adam Miller, that powerlifts all the time, and then be able to see that every day, he incorporates those things, and you can see how even with him being almost 36, he's setting PRs even now that he hasn't been able to touch in years because of maybe the metabolic training he incorporated for a little bit, or more of the hypertrophy bodybuilding training at certain points in time to get away or deload from that powerlifting power style training, which is just really cool.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Like you said about Adam, like incorporating like that more hypertrophy and different style training rather than just straight strength training. I've even seen it myself, for example, in a squat. In order to get a bigger squat, it seems like in the powerlifting community, most people will just say, oh, you just got to keep training your squat to get better and better. Actually, I want to talk about deadlift because this is something you've seen with myself, you know, being at the gym. It's for deadlift. If someone told me, if I want to deadlift 650, you just got to keep deadlifting and progressing your weight. Well, there's weeks where I'll go in the gym and I can pull 585 for reps. Then there's literally the next week where I can barely get 495 off the ground. And one of the things you've noticed is my muscles don't fire correctly, or they're just inactive during the movements. And depending on how amped up I get and how hyped I get, I can either just muscle it up, or there's weeks where I can lift it up or just not even lift it.
Yeah.
So kind of explain a little bit about that for me, and like kind of just activation and why it matters.
Yeah, so in the route of execution, sheerly for the deadlift, it's really important to realize that it's a very nervous system dominant exercise, which means everything that your spinal column talks to, your central nervous system, has to be actively working synergistically at the same time. And if you think about the deadlift, it starts literally dead from the floor. So you have a lot of muscles around the posterior side of your pelvis at that point in time that are in a very, very weak position. So if a muscle is weak there, it better be firing, otherwise that movement's never going to get started. So that's why a lot of times I'm giving you this idea of like, Josh, you have to get better at hinging your hips using your pelvis more. Because if you think about the power of your glutes as opposed to the power of your low back, which muscle is always going to grow faster and be more powerful? Your glutes.
Yeah.
So a lot of times you see with these new powerlifters or powerlifters that have bad execution in a sense, is it's just a lot of this lumbar movement. Like they're able to muscle so much, right? But when weight gets hard enough, things are going to break down, which is where knowing like, how do I contract my glutes and get them stronger, maybe without the use of a deadlift to make them better than the deadlift comes into play, or my quads or my hamstrings, okay? So that's why, number one, videotaping every set's very, very important. Number two, having somebody with a trained eye to tell you, like, this is what I'm seeing. Whatever's moving most is probably, or excuse me, whatever moves first is probably going to move and work most, right? So, you know, there's so many things to look at with these big complex movements, but the idea is if you have a very, very complex movement, you need to spend the time before the lift to activate these body parts, specifically glutes, hamstrings, quads, even your calves in a sense, to help with the dorsiflexion factor of maybe the squat or the deadlift. None of these things can go untouched or unnoticed because they all play dividends in stabilizing this joint so that we can create this acceleration through a movement.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and kind of would like to go a little bit more in detail about that, and just kind of understanding how other muscles come into play.